we're going to jump off of the conversation that Colt kind of set out for us to talk specifically at a maybe an even more general level about how states can support pathways to adult success. So I'm going to have the two gentlemen who joined us, who have not met, to briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll get rolling.
Good morning. My name is David Horseman. I'm Associate Commissioner of Career and Technical Education and Student Transition with the Kentucky Department of Education.
Good morning. My name is Kenneth Mason, and I'm a member of the Georgia State Board of Education, representing the 5th Congressional District. I'm also an instructional coach for the 7th Regional Education Board, so I'm kind of both hats here.
Before we start, a quick poll. How many folks in the room work in some capacity at the state level? Raise your hand. Okay. But we have a pretty good critical mass. So I'm going to ask a question that each of the panelists are going to answer, and then we'll kind of just go from there. A few other questions. We'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. So you can either follow up on Colt's specific presentation or anything that we have raised. Let's start with a question for everyone. So you've been here for, many of you for today, Colt Gill yesterday. Given what you've heard at this meeting, or what you know kind of the purpose of this group, what do you believe the most important role state policymakers, broadly defined, can play to develop and nurture a system of high-quality pathways to adult success for all students? David, go first.
Well, I spent most of my day yesterday in the collaborative, the yellow column yesterday, listening to how everyone is doing in California, Georgia, and Alabama. And we've seen success from the similar things that I heard yesterday. We believe that creating a structured cross-agency interaction, cross-institutional work together is the way to do that. There has to be alignment, obviously, between K-12 and post-secondary, which we've talked about a lot over the years, but we've got to put that on steroids in working with workforce innovation boards and employers to guide what we're doing about graduation requirements, career pathways, and all that, meaning starting early with developing exploration activities for young folks to get started thinking about those careers, and then creating pathways that are integrated with information that we've received from workforce, post-secondary, making sure that all three of those are aligned to make those pathways efficient. And when we take a dual credit or dual enrollment course, that actually is contributing to where we're going in that pathway.
Well, I think one of the first steps that's hitting me from yesterday and today is being intentional about breaking down walls of communication, because we oftentimes do good work with blinders on. And I'm here in the room with good folks from Douglas and Carroll Collaboration. You heard from Georgia State yesterday. We got Achieve Atlanta. And why is it that I'm in a room either here when Joanna brings us here, or in Georgia when Joanna brings us together? Those walls, we have to intentionally break down those walls and communicate. Something Tim said yesterday about education, it should be a nonpartisan issue. It should be non-agenda issue. It should be our collective issue. And the more and with this group, I believe and I see it being made real. In terms of state boards of education, a lot of times I need to just do the preface of what a state board of education is, because a lot of times it gets confused with local boards of education, and I'll explain in terms of the way Georgia's state board works, is we have 14 congressional districts. We're all appointed by the governor for 7-year terms. I've served 1 7-year term, I'm on my second. And we work in conjunction with the department and the House and Senate Ed committees to go from legislation to rules. So, and I think that is where that seat that I have, looking at early warning systems and navigation, we have the power. One thing that state boards all have in common, we have the power to convene, we have the power of the agenda, and we have the power to vote. And oftentimes, these things are absent from our agendas. And I was just at a National Association of State Boards of Education, and I just did a quick run through the topics that are on state board agendas. And I just picked the top 3: academic policy, finance, charters, and school choice. Academic policy is 228 items. Finance, 201 items. You scoot all the way down to support, early learning, 86 items, 52 items. We have to be intentional about creating items on our agenda and using the language to promote this idea statewide.
So yeah, when I think about policy, I think about 3 things primarily. So the first one is communication. So I completely agree, and I think that the folks that are implementing have to have a very deep understanding. It's easy to sort of read a few articles and then move forward and think that you understand what you're asking for. But I think you need to have a deeper understanding. So connecting with people who are doing this around the country or within your own state and seeing it in action so you can really describe the full picture and know all the components of it, I think that's critical. And then shifting that into a different kind of language that sticks for our legislators or school board members so that they have an easy framework and a story to tell around the power of these kinds of systems. So that's one, communication. My next one is really understanding the critical role that these tools can play in relation to any kind of investment a state or a school district wants to make. So if we are in a time when everybody's familiar with super successful companies, Amazon, Uber, Apple, all of these companies operate with data analytics that are determining when you log into Amazon and they tell you, oh, you probably want to buy this next. And you see what books might interest you based on what books you purchased. Yet in education, we have not figured this out. We haven't figured out the power of the data that we have about each student and understanding what their future needs are to determine how to get them across that finish line and to a diploma and onto something to help them with success in their later life. And we need to be able to take advantage of the critical information we have, and our systems are just far behind. And so to really understand how any investment a school district or a state wants to make in education, if they want to make that investment count, then they need to look at the data to ensure that they're really delivering on what students' needs are. So the third one I would say is, I always have to circle back to this, we really have to take an equity-based approach to this. Our investments in education in this country are mostly blanket investments. So they impact all students because everybody's a taxpayer and everybody's paying for our students' education. And we look at it as a very equitable-based opportunity rather than an equality-based opportunity rather than an equitable-based opportunity. And we really need to think about how to target those investments to meet student assets and student needs.
So now I'm going to ask each of the panelists an individual question, and we'll turn to you all if you have questions for any of them, and if we have time, we're going to go to a couple other topics. So for David, I'll start with you. What, from your perspective, are the best ways for people who are not at a state agency, who are working at a school district or working in the community, can best influence the deliberations and decisions that are happening, either in your division or in your agency as a whole, or at the state level as a whole?
Well, what we've found in our work is that it's critical to get the local people involved in the equation. policymakers don't always know what's going on at the ground level. And there are various ways that we can do that. And we talked a lot about data here this week, and one of our first successes in cross-agency work was the KY Stats, which is our data group, is that everybody agreed to be on the same page and share their data. Because when we have conversations and developing policy at the local level, we're all looking at the same data. Each agency is looking at the same data. And part of what helps develop that policy in the best way is having local people understanding their data and how that can relate and engage them with the conversation as we're in the process of developing policy. We've also learned that engaging our professional organizations, our superintendents associations, our principals, teachers associations, in that process to help advocate for the changes that they would like to see us in.
And then Kenneth, for you, an overarching theme of this meeting, there have been lots of discussions of things that kind of happen from the community up, sort of bottom up political approaches, and lots of also discussions of what can be done at a much more systemic and state level, by whether it be legislation or through state action. I wonder if you could talk about what you think is the right balance between kind of bottom up and, I won't say top down, but sort of state out works in developing effective systems.
Sure, to echo what David just said, we have to look for those opportunities to get community voice involved in the decision making and connecting the policymaker with the folks that it impacts, be it teacher, student, principal. Those connections have to be made. And I'm on the rules committee on our state board. And so, again, our job is to work with the department to interpret legislation. We are interpreting the legislation and creating the rule that is going to be impacted in the school. So we're always looking for opportunity and asking those probing questions to the department and to our constituents. How is this affecting you? And we have to seek that. We have to seek that input. And on the rules, as policy is enacted, it can't just be posted out for 30 days and then get the response. It has to be something more real and contextual actually before the vote comes up. I'm going to take something from my new mentor, John. He doesn't even know he's my new mentor. And my Jedi Master here. Last night we were talking about, it has to, talk about balance, it has to be almost like a triple balance. We have to have, John, we have to have a national perspective. We have to have the reality in the community, that community vision, but we also have to have the state vision together. And we talked last night about how do we create a state vision. We heard from Douglas and Carol yesterday, the community, and we're here talking about a national vision. So how do we come together to create our state? It has to be balanced that way. Two quick examples. I think collective impact is working really well in Georgia. Third grade reading, national issue, right? So, and the data says that children in poverty, 300 million words less than students that are wealthy, okay, by age 3. They're not hearing the word, so it's creating problems. So that's a national perspective. In Georgia, we have the Get Georgia Reading campaign that is a collective impact that is pulling in educators, public health with an epidemiology approach to studying early warning signs of failing high school by looking at how children are reading at the earliest levels. So that is a collective impact that is looking for results, but not test-driven results. We're looking at pulling in balancing that community and state approach with a national idea. Another quick one that I can think of is computer science. We just passed legislation. The governor, our new governor, just signed in computer science legislation. By 24, 25, all high schools need to have rigorous computer science instruction. Wow, okay, so what does the community say? Where are we going to find these teachers from? And so, again, national perspective, CS for all. We have CS for Georgia. They're working in in that space to help prepare teachers for this reality. So it has to be balanced with all three: national, state, and in that community piece. It has to drive it really.
So, Colt, on this theme, you talked very eloquently in your presentation, and I've obviously seen you in Oregon talk about the importance and the centrality of really engaging communities as part of the Student Success Act. But to be honest, community engagement is not something state agencies always do so well. So talk to us about how you're addressing that. Talk to us a little about how does the Oregon Department of Ed, and more generally, how does the state agency really promote authentic community engagement? What does it look like when it happens?
Thank you. So what I'm going to start with the Student Success Act. One of the things that the legislators and governor who created this bill said was that they didn't think districts could do this on their own, and they really needed to engage their local community in order to come through for our students. So it's built into the bill. So really since spring through today, we at the department have been working really hard on how to help districts understand what that means and engage authentically. So if you were to go to the Oregon State Department of Ed website, across the top there's a big banner that says Student Success Act. Click on that, you'll very quickly see a toolkit for local engagement. And so I'm going to share that something about that, but before I get there, just on the state level, there isn't actually a requirement, strangely enough, for the department to also authentically engage with stakeholders and communities across the state as we create the rules for this legislation. And there are a lot of rules to create in a bill this big with 80 different sections to it. We have that process going on, and we worked with our state board, which is really focused in on having authentic engagement. And so as we lead this process, our rules committees that we typically have for creating rules for Oregon administrative rules typically has somewhere between 15 and 25 people on these committees that are helping determine statewide what becomes statewide law. The rules committees that we have in place for the Student Success Act are in excess of 120 people that are all engaging deeply and trying to deeply understand what the legislation says and what communities and districts really need further guidance around. So, and this is a very diverse group of stakeholders that many of who have never been to the table. So it's at a time when we need to go at a really quick pace, it's slowing us way down as we explain processes and different things to these folks, but it also is creating far better outcomes in terms of buy-in from communities across the state so that everybody can be informed and helpful in our system. In the toolkit that we have for local engagement, we worked with the governor's office and a number of these stakeholders that are now at our statewide rulemaking table to say, what does authentic engagement look like at a local level, and how are we going to evaluate whether it's actually authentic or the districts are talking to their same 10 or 12 partners that they always talk to. And so we came up with 4 principles, and there's a lot behind these, and you'll see this in the toolkit and sort of guidance about how to get there. But the principles that we came up with were, 1, that the engagement must be equitable, which means that they have to recognize, honor, and respect diversity and reach out to voices that have not been the voices that are at that table and coming to those school board meetings on a regular basis. 2, that you need a partner to do this, because the school districts are not always the most trusted organization in the local community for all community members. So you need to reach out to other community-based organizations and nonprofits and say, we need engagement. We don't think we can lead it with this community because we're not a trusted partner, or other politics, national or local or state level politics, are getting in the way of us really hearing from these communities and these students and these families. So will you host an engagement for us? And we'll sit and listen, or you can come through and report to us later about what they said. The third one is that those you're engaging need to feel that they have been empowered. So districts for a long time have said, we're listening, we want to hear you, come to a board meeting, have your 3 minutes, and then the district goes forward with its decisions, and the people who have engaged and have provided input never see any of their input in the action that was created, that moved forward. Now sometimes it's there, and the district didn't call it out. So what we're saying to districts is, when you engage, you need to show them what you're doing with the information you collected and how that's impacting your future decisions. And publicize that so that they know their voice actually matters. Because the fourth principle is, don't stop there. This has to be ongoing. This isn't a one-time and 5-year event or a one-time-a-year event. But if you want authentic engagement, those doors need to remain open. And if you're going to get people to come back to your table, you have to show them how their input mattered in the decisions that were made for their children.
Accountability to your stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm going to turn to the audience. Do we have mics? Or am I doing not a mic thing?
There's a mic over here.
Okay. So I'll stand anyway. Questions for any of the panelists? Just walk to the mic, introduce yourself, and go forward.
Okay, well, no, it's working. See it here. Okay, I'm Laura Hansen. I'm the Director of Information Management and Decision Support for Metro Nashville Public Schools, so I'm at the local level here. I'm wondering, you've talked a lot about like the pre-legislative engagement and, you know, kind of, or as things are happening. I'm wondering, looking on the back end for legislation that has been passed, you've got the guidance, you have the engagement, and you know you're looking at how that's going at the local level. In the spirit of continuous improvement and kind of looking at how it all worked out, you know, do you have methods where you, from the state level, look at what was done, how it was working, and maybe if y'all have any examples of things where it didn't actually, you know, unintended consequences perhaps were a result of something that you planned at the state level, that when it was implemented, you had to kind of go back and go, nope, we need to revisit that. So I'm just a little bit about that part of it.
There's lots of examples. I think
I'd love to hear them.
in our committee structure, we are always going back and asking clarifying questions, getting reports back from the department, asking about like collecting the data, and so that we're sort of on a schedule with the more critical topics of how is this going and is it going as we expected it to go. One example I mentioned earlier was computer science. We quickly jumped on board, had high school, middle school, and elementary computer science standards. We had the courses, and lo and behold, we had no teachers. So we jumped out there and kind of didn't realize that, well, there may not be a large teacher pool prepared to teach this way. We can't pull math teachers in. That was a recent lesson that we're learning. We're still trying to figure out how to do that. So I would say in our committee structure, we're always going back, you know, with not only the controversial legislation, but just things that we need to keep up with because it's going to impact our trajectory and our strategic plan moving forward. So yes. Now, the wheels of change are slow, and how to problem solve around things that we expected to happen. I mean, we heard the example from Georgia State yesterday. they are very nimble with being able to use their data to be able to make those decisions, and brave with looking at the data. We need to be more bold with having a true look at our data and making those decisions, changing some of our decisions based on that. So,
I think,
Go ahead.
one of the things that we've found is communication. You talked about it earlier. When a new initiative comes about, like our data system and the labor market information, and we just rolled our results from our new accountability system this fall. One of the assistant superintendents pulled some data and met with the business group and was making all these statements about the data, but really didn't understand that there might have been duplicates in there, and so the data that was shared, and this was a pretty large district, they really didn't understand, and the communication piece, to me, is one of the biggest things. We've got a saying around our office, you've got to say it about 11 times. And even when you have the data, being able to tell the story in a way that people can understand it and use it, I think is one of the pitfalls and things that we're trying to do a better job with in rolling out new things.
I think in Oregon with the Student Success Act, they did try to learn from past mistakes. And I'll describe, so we'll see how it works going forward, but I'll describe the past mistake on a sort of grand scale is Oregon, for the last 3 decades, has been investing less and less each year in education. So it was on a 3-decade downturn in education funding, which meant that resources were dwindling in school districts, and fewer and fewer programs or school days or class size, all those things were impacted over the last 3 decades. At that same time, at the national level, we had No Child Left Behind, which was important in ways that helped us uncover disparities that previously weren't uncovered about how different groups of students are doing in our state. But it also had the impact with dwindling resources. At the same time, there was strong measurement and accountability focus around really 2 content areas, reading, writing, and mathematics. Meant that school districts were focusing almost all of their resources to those 2 content areas, and the rest were falling by the wayside. So as the last couple of years, there have been, as we've had these sort of statewide conversations, an ethic around what Oregonians want for their kids in education became very loud and clear, and it was for a well-rounded education. So people saw this narrowing of the curriculum and said, that's not really the way to prepare our students for next steps, that they see reading and mathematics as really important gateway skills to the rest of their school time and the curriculum, but that they needed a lot more than that in order to be successful once they're done with the K-12 system. So the learning from that is what we measure really matters, and it shapes what people pay attention to and where they put their resources. So as they were creating the Student Success Act, kind of realizing what they focused on in terms of getting measurements back from school districts would have a broad impact in how they spent their dollars, even though in reality there's a lot of flexibility around how they can spend their dollars. So they did 2 things. They created a number of kind of reporting systems and statewide checkups on the accountability for using the dollars appropriately, the way that each community designed for them to be used, and to look for outcomes, a variety of outcomes that could be local measures included in that, to show that it's making a difference for students. So that's one way. And then for the statewide measures, they picked 4 measures, all of which they're referring to as indicator measures of a lot of other things in the system that must be going right in order for these measures to be triggered. So they did pick one academic measure, and that is reading proficiency by 3rd grade, just because it is that gateway skill. Then they focused in on chronic absenteeism, trying to understand that if our schools are taking attention to student health and well-being, including mental and behavioral health, and they are welcoming and inclusive places for our kids, and the kids are getting a well-rounded, engaging curriculum, then they'll want to be at school, and that chronic absenteeism rate will come up. So trying to look at a broad measure. Then they looked at 9th grade on track. This is kind of a feature of me talking about early warning systems all the time, and the 9th grade on track measure statewide is a real strong indicator of high school success and graduation. So that one ended up in there, and that's indicative of a lot of different measures as well, and then high school completion and high school graduation. So looking at how do we re-engage students as well as how do we make sure that students are on path for a 4-year diploma. So they tried to use real broad measures in the statewide.
We have time for one more question.
They're asking.
We're going to ask Kevin.
I'll go quickly. First of all, I wanted to just say to Mr. Mason that you have another Georgian in the room, a product of the Atlanta Public School System. And then secondly, my question is about youth voice, youth engagement, and all of the conversations we've been having, students are at the center. So when you think about state policy work and the engagement, the toolkit that you mentioned, where does youth voice and lifting that up show up in this whole authentic community engagement process?
And my question is somewhat related. I'm also a product of the Atlanta Public Schools, so I guess that's the theme. I've been talking about state takeovers in several conversations this past couple of days. I live in Providence, Rhode Island, which is undergoing a very public state takeover. Wondering also, in the spirit of collaboration and the yellow strand of our conference, what are some real conditions for engaging the community around state takeovers and making the notion of a state intervention a positive action for a community?
Youth voice and state takeovers.
Okay, youth voice, absolutely necessary. 2 weeks ago, again at the National Association of State Boards of Education, I met student state board members from, I believe, Washington State, Guam, OSMAs, and Nebraska. The concept hadn't even entered my mind, and I don't know if I could get a voting member yet, but a student advisory board for my congressional district, absolutely a must. And then we have every year we have town hall meetings. We have at schools, and so I always do student session before, and they just come at me, which is fun. The other question about state takeover, and I'll just say this quickly. Please look at Georgia's Chief Turnaround Office. We have created legislatively that is not a state takeover, but an office designed for deep intervention for our lowest quartiles of school. And so that approach is not, it's an opt-in approach. We don't force districts to be a part of this. We invite them to be a part of it, and there's a growing community, and the strategy behind our Chief Turnaround Officer, Eric Thomas, is it has to be a district approach. The school can opt in, but he approaches the districts and builds their capacity at a district level. If you want to, I can talk more about that, but I know we don't have time. Chief Turnaround Office in Georgia.
I'll add 2 items here. So on the student voice piece, there actually was a part of the Student Success Act, a section that didn't get included in the final amendments, but I'm fighting back for it, which was a statewide student voice network that the department ran, but had through our education service districts had student voice within every community, impacting and influencing local school board decisions, and then coming together 3 times a year to influence the State Board of Education decisions and inform the legislature. They also have as a part of their package designing a statewide student climate survey that would be co-developed with psychometric folks and the students that were part of the Student Voice Network. And the Student Voice Network students would be the ones that would push it out through social media from student to student. So we're getting that real authentic student voice. We don't have a statewide school climate survey in Oregon. Some districts have something like that. And we do have one for our educators, and we don't have one for our students. And I think that's kind of criminal that the people we're really there to serve are not the ones we're asking how we're doing. We do have in that toolkit, though, you'll see some ways to authentically engage students. And there's examples from CBOs that focus on student voice and some of the work that they're doing to inform other school districts. So that's in that toolkit. Statewide takeovers, I'm not a fan of those. I'm just going to put that out there. I was a school district superintendent. I thought that was a really hard job. Trying to manage a school district from the state, I think, would be nearly an impossible job. We do have this as part of our Student Success Act, but it's very similar to what Kenneth described in that it's an opt-in model, so we are going to invite a group of districts to participate in an intensive coaching program where all the funds that they receive through the Student Success Act will be directed by a student success team from the Department of Education. Only the part that we'll be inviting to these school boards and school districts as they consider this option is that they get quite a bit of additional money. That's one incentive. The other one is that on these student success teams, we'll include members of their board and their local community and their students, so their voice is also inclusive of this state voice and these experts at school turnaround. So they'll all be together putting forward these recommendations that must be accepted by the local district.
Well, in Kentucky, we have student voice through our student information system, but it's more related to teacher-student relationships. But we do have a student advisory council for our commissioner, and they meet periodically through the year, and they're able to share their concerns at that time with the commissioner. In terms of school takeover, if you follow Twitter, one of our largest districts, there was quite a bit of traffic last year regarding whether to or not to do. In that case, that didn't happen, but together, our continuous improvement office worked together with them to develop a corrective action plan. And in terms of school takeovers now, there is a choice if you want assistance from the state or if you have an outside agency or group that you want to work with to continue down that path. But working together, there's been a great plan put in place, and good results are starting to come.
So please join me in thanking the panelists.